Hello and welcome back to PhDear Diary. My name is Andy Salkeld and this is my blog, vlog, whatever you want to call it, whilst I'm doing a PhD in psychology. This is episode 4 and is probably the first one where I've kind of hit, not a stumbling block, but just a motivation hit. Last week I was talking a lot about norms, social norms, both objective, subjective, descriptive, and injunctive, and then personal. And I really liked that concept, but what I wanted to do was to try and adapt it to talk about stress and social norms. So what I just discussed are social patterns that govern behavior. But stress itself isn't a behavior. There are stressed behaviors. There are things you do more when you are stressed, so on, but it itself isn't a behavior. Now, there may be patterns of behavior associated with it, but it makes it more complicated to kind of apply the framework of social norms too. And the way I was going to approach it was, look, if it walks like a duck, swims like a duck, quacks like a duck, it's probably a duck. So if we test it and stress applies is in reality a social norm through experimentation and testing, whether people respond to it in the same way, then maybe it has become a behavioral pattern. But it becomes a lot more complicated there. And basically, I had the discussion with my supervisor, and it just left me kind of demotivated, as in that that maybe that's not the best way to go about things. And it just made me, it hit my confidence in a way that that my confidence gets hit a lot, but this is the first time it's kind of hit me with regards to this, and it put me in a pretty bad place Wednesday. The important thing to remember is I live with depression and anxiety, so small things like this can really impact me in a way that they don't necessarily impact others. And so I kind of ended up in a very doom and gloom place. And it was the first time that that's happened. And many people find it quite hard to get out of these places. And the way I've come to kind of deal with this and to kind of overcome these challenges that have become commonplace in my life is very much to step back, to take time out, and then to come back fresh. Let my brain kind of unconsciously, subconsciously process what has gone on, what has happened, and how I need to readapt and change to deliver what I want. And so I ostensibly took Thursday kind of away from reading, away from research, and spent some time with some friends who I met on the Conversion Masters the year before. And it refreshed me. And I've kind of come at it, and I'm thinking about it differently now. Like, there's still that demotivation, but it's now very much right, well, I'm going to change the way I'm looking at it. So before, I was looking at the competing values framework of organisational culture. And what that is basically whether a company is internally focused or externally focused, and whether there is kind of it's like process or freedom driven, so like change or stationary. And that creates kind of 4 quadrants that broadly describe how a business culture operates. So in the kind of change focused external will operate differently to a process driven internal. So process driven internal is kind of bureaucratic. It's very order. You lead through process design to replicate the same thing over and over and over again. And so that's just one example of it. And the issue I was having was trying to connect either of those attributes, internally focused or externally focused. Wasn't really possible to connect behaviors to them specifically. So the way I'm thinking about this now is, okay, so maybe stress isn't a norm. So like, I still think I would like to test to see if it is, but what if we treat perceived stress or perceived occupational stress, work stress, as kind of an output? And then what we do is instead we look at more behavior driven dimensions in organizations. So this is where we can look at, say, a different culture model. So say Hofstede, where they have kind of like masculinity as one of the dimensions. So more masculine companies lead to more masculine behaviors. More feminine companies lead to more feminine behaviors. And what I can do there is I can assess the masculinity behaviors and kind of how strong, frequent, like how much they exist, and that impact on work stress, and then that impact onto kind of mental health outcomes and mental health attitudes. And what we do is we then look at each of the 6 dimensions, so masculinity being one, then there's kind of long-term orientation versus short-term orientation. And one of the things that we have to do in research is kind of theorize what the kind of direction of a relationship is. And in this regard, long-term behaviors are things like kind of 5-year plans, budget setting, preparation for succession planning, etc. Short-term plans are firefighting, so dealing with problems that occur and that aren't necessarily driven by your organizational design or decision. Then you have other things, which is it'll be things like I haven't actually deep dived into it. This is just me conceptualizing in my head so that next week I can go in and look down into the detail. But short term is things that need to be done now. Now, work stress, one of the kind of causes of it is a lack of time or a lack of resource. And as soon as you start looking short term versus long term, that will inherently lead to that, in theory, reduces time and therefore increases stress. And that's what I mean by looking at directionality. So what I would say is, if we look at time frame based social norms, so how often do you budget set, what period of time do you budget set for, how long are your plans, etc., etc. So if we find the social norm is short-term focused rather than long-term focused, we would expect in that situation that there would likely be more perceived stress in the workplace because everyone is focused on the now, not the tomorrow. And then the knock-on effect of that would be, because there is more stress, we would expect there to be a a similar positive correlation. So high stress implies high incidence of mental health conditions or kind of less positive mental states of people. And the bit that I'm also struggling with is, well, how do these link into attitudes? Because attitudes are almost personal. So they're kind of connected to your personal norm in a situation, which can be influenced by by the other social norms. So you internalize the social norms that are around you. But how does stress and how does kind of worse mental health as a result influence your attitudes towards it? Because in a time pressured environment, and in a kind of a hyperlogical, rational business process led situation, anything that detracts from optimal output would be seen as negative, and therefore you would assume that anything that stops someone operating at their capacity to operate diminishes from it, or things begin to take more time because they are struggling. And understand, I'm not saying any of this is wrong. This is just theorizing the direction. So when things start taking longer, or when things start being as optimal, you would expect in the kind of hypological situation that this would, in theory, be frowned upon. Okay? And therefore, in a time-pressured environment, you would expect attitudes towards mental health to potentially worsen. And then in a long-term environment where the kind of peaks and troughs can be smoothed out over time, you would maybe expect it to be better because there is more time to adapt to a situation. But then similarly, what does this mean with regards to, say, the masculinity dimension? Do more masculine behaviours lead to different attitudes towards mental health? So that's the process I'm kind of going through right now. And it's obviously there was a bit of a knock, bit of a setback, but it's like you dust off, you go back to the drawing board and you start again. And it's one of the hardest things anyone can ever learn in life, is that actually not everything is perfect first time. And you can try and you can fail. And through failure, you actually learn and become stronger and better as a result. And what I am learning about kind of how to do a PhD and how to approach it is, don't assume you're always right, or don't assume your first idea is going to be the correct one or the best one or the right one, etc. Because it's probably not. And we just have to learn from it. And that's very much what I'm doing now. I think I will go down and I will look at different models of operation of organizational culture, and I will then look at which one of those are primarily based in behaviours. And I still think later on, once I've kind of looked at those dimensions, then I can look at kind of, has stress become a normative behaviour? And just because I am using an experiment to test one thing, and so the relationship between a masculinity norm and a work stress output and mental health, attitudes and outcomes, just because I'm experimenting in one way doesn't mean I can't use that same study to gather subject variable data that can inform future studies. So what I mean by this is, one of the things I was interested in, and still am interested in, is whether the actual, I believe the term is organisational structure characteristics. So this is things like the size of a business, the shape of a business, the construction of the management team of the business. But then also looking in a bit more detail, the funding structure. So private equity, listed entities, government funded, etc. Or also revenue generation. How does it make its revenue? Is it through grants and loans? Is it through recurring revenue subscription models? Or is it through actually just selling products and having to go out? Is it through competitive tender processes? Because I think the way those operate will feed down into the way the people exist within the business. But just because I'm studying one thing doesn't mean I cannot gather all that data. Because if we start looking at the data and we say, right, well, here's this bit, then, okay, well, there might be some connection here. Then we do another study that say, so the first one does masculinity, the next one does long-term orientation. Then we look at that, and then we can potentially combine both of just the subject variable data, and then look at that, and then do it for the next of the 6 Hofstede dimensions. Again, I don't know if this is the one I'm going to do, but that's the idea. And then look down, look down, look down, combine the data and say, well, actually, what we're seeing quite commonly here across all this data, this huge amount of data, is the private equity structures have higher stress. And I'm not saying that's going to be the case, but private equity is very much 3 to 5 year horizons. Everything's deal-led, everything's numerically kind of structured and growth-centric, and meeting requirements, etc., is kind of one of the central tenets of it. You get rewarded an awful lot for it, but it is very much that's a different attitude to the way the business works than say a listed entity or a government funded entity. And as such, I want to make sure I'm gathering that data where I can as I'm doing these other studies, because that, I feel, is kind of something that I haven't really seen considered elsewhere. There's someone I know who's looked at how private equity is actually more emotional than logical because of the way it's because they don't have the time to actually do the data, so they have to use gut feeling a lot more than not. Again, it happens. But yeah, so I don't think, from where I was 2 days ago when it was really doom and gloom, I've kind of stepped back. I've woken back up to the reality that actually there's just other ways of looking at things. I am kind of encouraged to go back and think about it more, and now it's just about sitting down and kind of reading again. And again, this is one thing that I really struggle with, is I like acting. I am very much behaviour-led myself. I like doing things. I like designing things. I like investigating. I like solving problems, etc. Whereas this is data gathering. This is understanding. And it's not... I lose interest, which is not a good thing. I lose interest in these things quickly. As soon as I feel I understand it, then I want to move on and do the next thing. And I need to afford myself the time to be able to do this correctly. Now, I'm balancing doing a PhD alongside several other things, which is challenging. So I need to kind of balance everything correctly, but it's a learning process. I'm only 1 month in, and you have to think, after 1 month on a new job, you are still uncertain. You are still... Not everything is perfect, but that is what it is more than anything. So outside of that, It's been a pretty good week. The new 9.2 World of Warcraft expansion came out. I am back playing my Warlock again. Enjoying it. It's much of the same. It is a game that one of my closest friends described it as bubblegum gaming, where I know exactly what I'm doing. I know exactly how to play it. There's no learning process. There's no kind of growth process. It just is, and I'm just playing immediately, and that's exactly what I need. It's something that I can spend a couple of nights on when I have time, and then I just get to enjoy it and see the story, which is great. And otherwise, I have friends coming up this weekend. We are doing an escape room tomorrow, which will be quite exciting. It's a different kind of venue than I've done before. And then we should have an afternoon of board games, which will be good. I don't know which ones we're going to play, to be honest, because there'll be 6 of us, and 6-player board games are kind of rare. You end up in almost the social destruction territory. I suppose Shasan would work. 7 Wonders might work. I'm just looking at my board games, which are over there. Alone could be interesting. Those are kind of the main ones. A lot of board games are kind of aimed at the 4-player, which is fine. Might actually get people to play in human conditions, which is something I love the concept of, but who knows for certain whether we can get that happening. But yeah, I'm looking forward to it. It'll be good, and then it'll be back on and looking at these new kind of different organisational culture frameworks next week. But yeah, so that's where I am. It's been the first tough week. I know there will be more tough weeks in the future, but I think it's important to kind of hold these. It's one of the reasons I'm doing this in PhDear Diary, is because this is kind of a track of that. So whilst I might not go back and watch it, people who want to do a PhD can learn from it and can see what happens, what you do, etc., etc. So that's kind of the idea. You'll notice that I've changed kind of the structure of the frame, as it were, just with the camera a bit higher up and me sat a bit further back. That's just because of introducing another screen around. But it gives a bit more light and a bit more kind of space. But yeah, so that's where I am. And hopefully... Oh, one other thing. Just remembered of it. So it's not... I don't talk about it much, but I got into painting miniatures. Like Games Workshop, Warhammer, all of that, during COVID, as a way to kind of express my creativity and my want to entertain and to do things that just allow me to do when we couldn't do anything else. And I won my little miniature for Kiganil, won a competition this week in the Tabletop Titans Discord, New Year, New Hobby, which was... Like, I am not confident in my ability to paint. I mean, I'm not confident in anything. I look it, but I'm not. And I always just kind of do things for me. And I put a bit of effort into it, but it won. And it was really nice to hear people say such positive things about it, which was great. Like, it kind of gave me confidence in my ability to actually do these things, and that I'm doing it to a level that people appreciate. But yeah, that was something really positive that happened. And it is very important to make sure we hold on to those things, because we can forget them quite easily. But yeah, so that's where I am this week, and that will be the end of episode 4. So thank you very much for listening and watching, and I will see you next week. Thank you.